This week in IT, Microsoft makes a breakthrough in the race for commercially useful quantum computers, File Explorer gets cleaned up, and Russian hackers are attacking multi-factor authentication codes again. So stay tuned for all the latest. Welcome to This Week in IT, the show where I talk about everything connected to Microsoft 365, Windows, and Azure. Before I get started, I've got a quick favor to ask you. Almost 73% of the people who watched last week's video weren't subscribed to the channel. Now, as we go live today, we're on about 11,165 subscribers. I'd love it if we could push that up to 11,200 this week. So if you'd like to see these weekly news roundups from Petri.com, please subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hit the bell notification to make sure that you don't miss out on the latest uploads. Microsoft announced this week that it's made a significant breakthrough in the race to making quantum computing commercially useful with its Majorana 1 chip. Now, just in case you're not very familiar with the idea of quantum computing, today all the processors that you have inside the computer sitting on your desks at work or at home use a system where they have two states essentially, on or off, so 0 or 1. Now, the idea of quantum computing is that you can have multiple states at any one time, significantly increasing the capacity, the processing capacity of those processors. Now, quantum computers have existed for some time. The chips behind them have, a certain number of what they call qubits. Now, Microsoft's new chip only has 8 qubits at this time, and other manufacturers, Google and IBM, have created chips that have a much larger number of qubits. The problem here is all about scale. Now, Microsoft says in order to make these processors really useful, commercially useful, whether it be in a data center or some other application, you need to be able to scale them to at least 1 million qubits. So that is the goal. So what does Microsoft actually say? So they have a new architecture that they've developed called a topo conductor, and instead of being based on silicon, it's based on a material called indium arsenide. Now, I don't know anything about this material, but essentially they're able to pack a much larger number of qubits into a smaller space. Now, they've only proved this with 8 qubits at the moment, but they're saying that they're able to see a future where they'll be able to scale this technology to potentially get those magical 1 million qubits into a device that doesn't take up the size of an entire football pitch, and they can actually fit into an Azure data center. So what does this mean in practical terms for businesses and for you and I? Well, I don't think that we're going to see, commercially useful quantum computing in a year's time or in 2 years' time. It could be years rather than many, many decades. Some people think even with this announcement, we could still be looking at a minimum really of 2 decades. So it's definitely something that's within my lifetime, within your lifetime. But what does it mean for the world of computing if we were actually able to achieve these commercially useful quantum computers? Well, there are always pros and cons to all of this kind of technology. One of the biggest fears, of course, that security professionals have is that our current cryptography standards will essentially become useless because quantum computers can perform calculations in such a massive scale that's not possible today. It will essentially be really easy to decrypt without the necessary keys that would be required today any encrypted messages that we rely on for protecting things like passwords and sensitive information. So that's one worry. But of course, being able to calculate things on a massive, massive scale has all sorts of potential benefits for scientific work, for artificial intelligence. I mean, the speed at which artificial intelligence has developed over the last couple of years, if you were able to apply some of the models and the generating of those models to quantum computing, can you just imagine how that technology would improve on a massive scale. Now, Microsoft isn't developing this technology entirely by itself. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, is also providing some of the funding for this. Of course, there are so many potential applications, and just like the race to provide the best AI systems in the world and to get this advanced general AI and be the first people to produce that, America, the States, companies, Microsoft, Google, IBM, they want to be the first to achieve commercially useful quantum computing because of the potential power this would give them. Despite all of this news, even when Microsoft is able to make these devices in a way that's affordable, commercially useful, I don't see quantum computing coming to a desktop or notebook to you anytime soon. This is going to be something really reserved for Azure data centers when it finally becomes available, if it ever becomes available. They could have roadblocks that stop them from achieving this goal of 1 million qubits. So let's see what happens. But I think this is really a data center technology and not something that we're very likely to see anytime soon coming to personal computing. Microsoft has been busy working to streamline some features in File Explorer in the latest insider build of Windows 11 24 H2 that's now been released in the dev and beta channel. Now, some of these changes are only going to affect European users because essentially Europe or the EU is saying that you need to remove some of these features that, essentially track user activity. So, of course, in File Explorer, you have things like, history. There's a history API. You get things like recent files. So the EU is essentially saying you need to remove that functionality for users in the EU and the EEA, the economic area. So if you want to get rid of those features, you can simply change your region in Windows to a European country. That might have some disadvantages, of course. If you want to keep those features and you're in the EU, you can change your region to the United States. So you're still going to have a choice, essentially. So that's how these features are kind of controlled, and Windows decides what it is you're going to get. Now, with the removal of those features that collect that user data, there are some bits and pieces in File Explorer that are going to disappear in those regions. So, it's thought that, that the application will become a little bit lighter and a little less clunky, potentially. Also this week, there's some updates coming. I'm not sure whether it's this update or some other update. I think it's a different update that's now in the, the release preview channel. Can't remember the name of all these channels. I think it's release preview, that potentially is going to improve performance for OneDrive users within File Explorer. So you're probably aware that if you're working with OneDrive files that are synchronized to your device, you have access to them in File Explorer. Doing things like a right click can be a little bit slow and clunky. It's been that way forever, and finally Microsoft says at least that they have fixed that problem. Well, the proof is in the pudding. Let's see when that update actually comes to the stable channel. There's also a new feature coming for OneDrive users that will allow you to continue working on a file that you've had open on a mobile device just through a one-click operation. You can just resume that work that you've been doing on a mobile device. I don't know how useful that is. I almost rarely edit documents on my mobile, but maybe that will be useful for some people. There's also an update coming to Recall. Now, this is only available on people who have these new Copilot Plus PCs and the relative MPU that enables all of this advanced AI functionality. And Microsoft is saying that those users will now be able to delete all existing snapshots. So you get the option just to wipe all of that history if you want to do it. So I think that's good news too. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the updates to File Explorer. There are lots of alternatives to File Explorer. Microsoft has been making changes to it over the last couple of years. You've now got things like, tabs, and the layout of it has been updated quite significantly. It's based on a completely new back-end technology as well. Personally, I still think it's a little bit clunky. Do you use something else? If you're a business, would you ever allow your users to replace File Explorer? probably not a good idea, just saying. But just let me know what you think about these changes. Does Microsoft need to make a complete overhaul to File Explorer again? Is it, really useful in its current form? I'd love to know what you think below. Storm 2372. Yep, doesn't mean much to me. This is a group of Russian hackers, and it seems that every couple of months we get some news like this, but there's some interesting details about what's going on here that is really useful for you to understand to make sure that you can secure your business. So apparently this group is using the Microsoft Graph API, and essentially what they're doing, we've seen this kind of attack before. You get essentially a fake login page, and they're able to phish the two-factor authentication code from you. You put it into this login page which you think is genuine, and then they're able to use that code to actually log in as you. So that's a pretty big problem. So what is Microsoft saying about this? So this is being used to essentially hack people's, obviously, I guess if it's not obvious, I'll tell you, Microsoft 365 accounts, because obviously that's what the Microsoft Graph is connected to. So hackers are using this to access Microsoft 365 accounts. You should really be using two-factor authentication, especially on accounts that have high privileges within your tenants, but it's not completely foolproof. So Microsoft is saying, well, what can you do to protect those accounts? The number one thing that you can do, and I think every organization should be doing this, is making sure that you have conditional access policies enabled, and you make sure whatever you're enabling within those policies is going to be effective for your organization. So that's the first thing that you should be looking at, because multi-factor authentication on its own isn't enough to provide you with complete protection. Microsoft is also saying that you should only enable device code flow when it's absolutely necessary, because this seems to be a bit of a problem. So what exactly is device code flow? So imagine you've got some kind of application, this could be connected to Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Entra ID, and you've got an application that requires some kind of code for you to input, but it's, it's only a text-based application. It doesn't have the ability to display graphics. And basically it passes, dealing with all that code stuff, the code that you have to input to finally authorize yourself to a web browser window. So there are some applications that do that kind of authentication flow in that way because they don't have any other choice. What Microsoft is saying is you should only have that kind of authentication flow enabled where it's absolutely necessary, and you should strictly control it, again with conditional access policies, to make sure that it's limited to just that device in that location. So maybe it's, some kind of Android Teams room that you can pin down to say, well, yeah, that device is always in that network location, so I'm only going to allow device code flow to happen on that device, on that particular IP address that it's been permanently assigned. So they're saying that, you should really carefully look at what's going on to make sure that that isn't allowed everywhere in your organization. So there are steps that you can take to make sure that these flaws, if you like, in two-factor authentication are just inherent, that it's not a perfect solution, that you do as much to protect yourself as possible. If you found this video useful, I'd really love it if you gave it a thumbs up, because it helps to get the video seen by more people on YouTube. I'm going to leave you with another video on the screen now, where I look at the new Facebook style storyline feature that's coming to Teams next month, so do check that out. But that's it from me for this week, and I'll see you next time.